Well, joining me now is David Sedney in Washington, D.C. He's the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, focusing on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia. And in Beirut, we have Graeme Smith. He's an author and former Afghanistan consultant for the International Crisis Group, an organization dedicated to preventing and resolving global conflict. And still with us is Omar Samad, who's a former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada. Good to have you all on the program, gentlemen. David Sedney, let me come to you. 17 years on, do the Americans know why they're in Afghanistan and what they're doing?
The Americans have known why they're in Afghanistan from the beginning, which is to prevent Afghanistan from, again, becoming a base from which America is attacked. And on that score, the U.S. has been successful. In terms of broader interests, such as whether to try and help Afghanistan build itself as a nation, or the role that the U.S. plays more broadly politically, various U.S. administrations have gone backward and forward over the last 17 years. But on the core interest of why the U.S. is in Afghanistan and what it's achieved, actually the U.S. knows what it's doing and it has succeeded.
Graeme Smith, what do you think about the fact that for many Americans, they feel as if it's this idea of, well, we'll stay and we'll make up a new reason as we go along. So initially it's to defeat Al-Qaeda, and then it's, I don't know, nation building. And beyond that now, I guess we're dropping the mother of all bombs on Daesh, and we're staying to help this Afghan government get on its own 2 feet. Is it going to be a forever war, Graeme?
Well, my understanding of the state of play in conversation between the Americans and the Taliban at the moment is the Americans are trying to signal that no, it won't be a forever war, that they don't intend a sort of Korea-style permanent presence of international forces. And that signaling is very, very important, not only to the Taliban, but also to the region, because you have Iran, Pakistan, Russia, even to some degree China, being really reluctant to see a permanent U.S. presence, troops on the ground inside Afghanistan. And so some of the thinking is whether or not they can maintain what's called a CT platform, a counterterrorism capability, that mitigates global terrorism, but doesn't involve U.S. bases in a place where the neighbors are unhappy about them.
Ambassador Omar Samad, does your country still need the Americans to help it?
Today, yes. Tomorrow, it depends on how we do with the political process, the peace process that is still not off the ground. There's talk about talk, and there are some discussions and meetings taking place, but it doesn't involve all the stakeholders and the main stakeholders, and it has not become an intra-Afghan process yet. So the American presence is not just an American presence, it's an international, NATO, a UN-sanctioned presence in Afghanistan. Let's not forget that. And it is needed because on one hand, there is an uptick in escalation in attacks, not only from Taliban and various affiliates of the Taliban, but also from this new phenomena, sort of new phenomena called Daesh in Afghanistan, which is questionable as to exactly what its roots are and what its motivations are. It's not very quite clear. There are times when the Taliban see it as a rival and fight it, and there are times when they opportunistically actually work together. So we need to make sure that Afghanistan doesn't create a new vacuum again and fall into this trap again as it did in the 1990s and become a threat to everybody else because of foreign international terrorist groups taking over with the help of local extremist radicalized groups. Now, that presence is important, but it's also a presence that helps Afghanistan become self-reliant, because this is a country that's been destroyed over and over for many years, and it needs help in order to rebuild itself and make sure that it can take care of itself. And so that assistance is also very critical and has to continue, as well as the counterterrorism component that I think has to stay and has to be viable and credible as we move forward.
David Sedney, at the very top of the program, we spoke to Ahmed Wali Massoud, of course, former ambassador, the brother of Ahmed Shah Massoud, whose killing by Al-Qaeda precipitated so much of what we've seen over the past 17 years. It was the green light for 9/11 and so on after the Taliban hit the Northern Alliance. He said that the Americans and others have backed the wrong people over and over the past 17 years in his country. Is he right?
He is partly right. After 9/11, the U.S. Came in and forced the Taliban out, but the United States did not embark upon any kind of nation building. It turned power in Afghanistan back over to a group of warlords and power brokers, many of whom had been instrumental in causing a devastating civil war in Afghanistan in the 1990s. Some of those people, their successors, are still in power, leaving power in Afghanistan very fragmented. So certainly the U.S. originally backed a lot of people who brought Afghanistan in the wrong direction. That was a mistake by President Bush, by Secretary Rumsfeld, and others at the time. Over the years, the U.S. has talked about nation building, but never done it. Over the years, the U.S. has both added forces and set deadlines, sending conflicting messages to everybody involved. So the overall U.S. impact in Afghanistan has been quite muddled. While the focus, as I said before, has remained on making sure Afghanistan does not become a place from which America is attacked, and that has been successful, the overall Afghan effort has yet to show the kind of success that the American people, and even more importantly, the Afghan people, have expected of it. Now, we have to stress one thing, however. The Taliban would not be the force they are today. They would not be able to threaten Afghan society without the safe havens in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. If the safe havens in Pakistan didn't exist, the Taliban and the Afghans would have come to peace already. That is really important to remember. If we only focus on what's happening inside Afghanistan and ignore the role that Pakistan is playing, then you cannot get an accurate picture of what is going on in the region.
Yeah, interesting addition to what we were discussing just a few minutes ago. So, Graeme, if we suppose that the U.S. has muddled this over the past 17 years, and they have often backed the wrong people over the past 17 years, on the cusp of an election, or on the eve of an election, and on the cusp of a new parliament, and moving forward, who should the U.S. be backing in Afghanistan right now?
You know, that is always the question that I get from particularly American policymakers. Who do we back? And I think that's frankly the wrong question to be asking. In this day and age, picking favorites, picking politicians in the domestic politics of another nation should not be the business of the United States of America. And in Afghanistan, when they have tried to do that, the results have been incredibly violent and very unpleasant. And so I think the U.S. needs to step back and arrange for a way that Afghans can talk to each other about the political future of their country. And the U.S. should not be overly prescriptive about what the outcome of such a dialogue would be. And I'm personally concerned that any kind of peace talks right now are a moving target, because when the sun came up this morning, the kind of deal that you could cut with the Taliban is very different than the kind of deal that you're going to get now that the sun is going down today and the most powerful man in southern Afghanistan, General Abdul Razik, was assassinated earlier today. And so as the government continues to lose ground, the kind of agreement that could be reached changes. And if the Taliban continue to advance, the kind of Afghanistan that emerges might not be very welcomed by the international community.
Ambassador Omar Samad, what do you think about that? Do you think that the Taliban, with every passing day, especially after this killing in Kandahar, do you think that they gain in strength and that any deal would be fundamentally different the more time ticks along?
Yes, I think that the Taliban strategy, backed by those who are supporting them for all kinds of reasons, regional geopolitical reasons, as well as more localized reasons, religious reasons, sort of jihadi type reasons and others, they have a game plan, and they have been very consistent with it over the last 17 years at least. They have been very focused, and this is why it seems on the surface that they they have momentum and that they are scoring points here and there. But let me say that Afghanistan is a very complex society. What we need is not, on one hand, choosing favorites and choosing people who will lead it from the outside. I agree that we should let the Afghan people use their own means and their own ways and their own intellect and reasoning to come up with leadership that represents all of them, and that is all-inclusive. It's a country that is pluralistic, and it needs a certain level of democracy, that fits the Afghan mold. It needs a certain level of participation at all levels of all different stratas of society in order to come to an agreement and a consensus. What we have lost over the last few years is this consensus-building ability, both inside Afghanistan as well as in the region and beyond. There was a time when the whole region was backing this effort of rebuilding Afghanistan.
Right.
Nowadays, it is fragmented, and we don't exactly know who stands where. And so the Taliban take advantage of this and have taken advantage of this for their benefit in making sure that they are recognized as a player, and they are. But at the same time, they have to understand that they have to play this game eventually within the Afghan mold, and as part of the Afghan discussion, intra-Afghan discussions that have to take place, and not be a proxy of somebody else, and not carry favor for other people's geopolitical and geostrategic objectives.
Gentlemen, it's been an important discussion, and I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers, and we do wish the Afghan people all the very best ahead of the weekend's election. Graeme Smith, Omar Samad, and David Sedney, thanks for joining us.